Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something that's, well, really crucial for medical progress, but maybe a bit behind the scenes. Biobanks.
That's right. And yeah, people might picture, big freezers, lots of tubes,
Right.
but it's so much more. These are complex systems. They link biological samples, things like blood, tissue, even DNA, with tons of information about people's health and lives.
Exactly. We've dug into quite a few sources for this. Papers, reports, you name it, trying to get a handle on how these things work.
Uh-huh.
So our mission today is really to unpack what biobanks are, why they're just so essential now for understanding health, disease, finding treatments, and also explore the tricky bits, the challenges, both scientific and, ethical.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area. It's really where a lot of future medicine is being shaped. Sample by sample, data point by data point, and it all rests on super high standards and, well, trust.
Okay, let's dive in then. What exactly is a biobank, fundamentally?
Well, at its heart, it's a place that stores biological samples. But the real power, the thing that makes it different, is linking those samples, your blood, maybe a bit of tissue, with lots and lots of health information about the person who donated it.
So not just the sample in isolation.
No, not at all. You get genetic data, lifestyle stuff, clinical history, sometimes going back years. It's that connection, the sample plus the rich data, that makes it such a powerhouse for research.
Like a library where every sample comes with a really detailed biography. Okay, so why is that combo so important for research these days?
Oh, it's been a game changer, honestly. Having access to all this from maybe millions of people, it lets researchers tackle complex diseases, figure out how genes and environment interact. It fuels genomics, personalized medicine. I mean, the scale is just completely different now.
Millions, wow.
Yeah, one source mentioned that even like over 10 years ago, the U.S. alone had hundreds of millions of specimens stored and was adding tens of millions more each year. That kind of scale just opens up whole new questions you can ask.
Incredible numbers. And I guess they're not all the same. There are different types of biobanks.
Definitely. You've got your big population-based ones collecting from lots of people in the general public to spot broad health trends.
Okay.
Then there are disease-specific ones, maybe focused just on cancer or heart disease or even really rare disorders. You also find tissue banks that specialize and, interestingly, even virtual biobanks.
Virtual. So no freezers.
Right. They focus more on linking up the information about samples stored in different places rather than holding the physical samples themselves. It's more about data sharing and coordination.
Got it. Okay, so diverse, massive collections, really foundational for modern research, but, handling millions of human samples, linking them to super personal data, that screams ethical questions right from the start, especially around consent.
Absolutely. And this is a really key difference between biobanks and, say, a standard clinical trial.
How so?
In a typical trial, you consent to one specific study. It has clear aims, a set time frame. You know exactly what they're testing.
Right. But biobanks, they keep samples for a long time for research that might not even be planned yet.
Exactly. For potentially many future projects, maybe years down the line, using methods that haven't even been invented. So you need a different kind of consent. It's often called broad consent.
Broad consent.
Oh, yeah, you're basically agreeing for your sample and data to be used for a range of future research within certain rules and oversight, but without knowing the specifics of every single future study.
So those consent documents must need to be incredibly clear then.
Oh, absolutely critical. The sources we looked at really stress this. They have to spell things out.
Like what specifically? What needs to be in there?
Well, definitely the scope of the consent, what kinds of research are okay, how is it governed, who makes decisions. They need to cover things like, could your sample or data be used across borders? What about intellectual property if something is discovered? Is commercial use possible? And of course, huge emphasis on data protection. How is your information kept safe?
Makes sense. If you're agreeing to something so open-ended, the ground rules need to be crystal clear. But are there things you might think would be covered, but maybe aren't always spelled out explicitly?
That's an interesting point. One source actually looked at template consent forms and found that things like, say, financial compensation, if your sample leads to a profitable drug, well, that's often not explicitly mentioned.
Really?
Yeah, or even what happens to your sample after you pass away or if you can't make decisions anymore. Sometimes these might fall under broader clauses about storage or use, but they might not be highlighted up front.
Huh. So for anyone listening, if you're considering donating a sample, You really need to read that broad consent form closely. It's not just ticking a box.
Absolutely. You need to understand the long game, what permissions you're actually giving. It's about being an informed partner, really.
Okay. Now, staying with this idea of future research, sometimes researchers stumble onto things about a donor's health they weren't looking for. Incidental findings, right? That sounds complicated.
It really can be. Incidental or sometimes unsolicited findings.
Hmm.
Yeah. Biobanks need clear policies for this, and the consent forms often give you choices.
Choices like what?
Like, you might be able to say, no, I don't want any individual results back, or maybe, okay, tell me only if it's something serious and actionable for my health.
But deciding what's actionable, that sounds tricky. Who decides? And isn't there a risk of causing unnecessary worry?
That's the minefield, exactly. Is telling someone about a finding actually helpful, or could it cause more harm? Think about PSA screening for prostate cancer.
Mm.
We know early detection isn't always beneficial in trials. It can lead to anxiety, unnecessary treatments.
Right. The net harm idea.
Precisely. So deciding whether to feedback a finding isn't straightforward. It requires careful judgment.
And if someone does get information back about their health from this research, there are other implications they need to know about.
Yes, and this is super important. The consent form should clearly state this. If you receive health information, you might be legally required to disclose it in certain situations, like applying for life insurance, for example.
Ah, okay. That's a big one.
It is. And donors should also usually have the choice to just opt out entirely, say, I don't want any health feedback, or don't recontact me at all.
Good to know that option exists. So, beyond these incidental findings, what about the big one, confidentiality? Especially with genetic data being so sensitive.
Huge issue. The risk of data breaches is always there, and it's something explicitly discussed in the ethics and consent process. And naturally, the more data you link together about one person, the higher the stakes become if there is a breach.
Makes sense. And I saw something surprising in the sources. The risk can also go up if the donor themselves has put their genetic info out there, like on the internet.
Yeah, kind of counterintuitive, isn't it? But if someone's genetic profile is available publicly, say from a genealogy test they did,
Right.
then theoretically, even if the biobank data is de-identified, having that public data point floating around could, in some edge cases, slightly increase the chance of someone figuring out who the de-identified data belongs to, even if it's not intended.
Wow. Okay, so given all these risks, what are the main safeguards biobanks actually use to protect people's privacy?
They use layers of security. A key one is pseudonymization, basically replacing your name and direct identifiers with a unique code.
Like a secret code name?
Sort of. Sometimes they even use double encoding, making it even harder to link back. Think of it like this. Your name and address are in one locked box. Your sample and all your health data are in another locked box, linked only by that code.
And the key to the first box, the one with the name, is kept separate.
Exactly. Kept very separate, often at the original hospital or a clinic where you donated. And access to that identifying information is super restricted.
So the scientists doing the research, they never see your actual name or personal details.
Generally, no. Access to the identifiable data is only allowed for very specific reasons, like if they absolutely need to track down some missing medical info for the research, or, importantly, if the donor agreed to be recontacted for follow-up studies.
And there are strict rules about not sharing that personal ID info elsewhere.
Absolutely explicit rules that personal identifying data will not be given to the researchers analyzing the samples, and definitely not to third parties like insurance companies or employers, period.
And when results get published.
Always anonymized.
Yeah.
Presented in a way that no individual donor could possibly be identified. It's all about protecting that link between the person and their data.
Okay, that makes sense. A system of codes and locked boxes, essentially.
That's a good way to put it. Robust data management and security are paramount.
Right. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. We've talked ethics, now let's talk practicalities. For the research to mean anything, the quality of the samples has to be top-notch, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's non-negotiable. If your samples or the data linked to them are flawed, the research results could be totally unreliable. You waste time, money, maybe even head down the wrong scientific path.
And where are the biggest quality weak spots? What makes it tricky?
A huge challenge area is what's called the pre-analytical phase.
Mm.
Basically, everything that happens to that sample before it gets analyzed in the lab or settled into long-term storage.
So like how it's collected, how it's transported?
Exactly. Collection methods, the type of tube used, how long blood sits before clotting or processing, the temperature during transport or even short-term storage, how quickly it's processed. All these little steps can have a big impact.
And those small variations can actually change the sample enough to mess up the research later on.
Fundamentally,
Yeah.
especially for sensitive analyses like metabolomics, looking at all the small molecules, or proteomics, all proteins, or biomarker discovery. Tiny variations in how the sample was handled early on can skew those results dramatically.
So standardizing every single step must be incredibly important, making sure everyone does it the same way every time.
Essential. That's where standard operating procedures, SOPs, come in. Detailed, written instructions for every single step. And alongside that, meticulous documentation, recording exactly what happened to each sample, when, how. It's the backbone of quality.
Are there, like, international standards or guidelines to help biobanks get this right?
Thankfully, yes. There are organizations like ISPR that publish best practices, which are widely respected, and there's actually a specific international standard just for biobanking, ISO 2387.
ISO 2387. Okay.
Yeah, think of it as a quality rulebook specifically designed for biobanks. Plus, there are standards for those tricky pre-examination steps too, like the CEN standards evolving into ISO ones. They help everyone get on the same page globally.
So using a formal quality management system, maybe like ISO 9001, helps biobanks implement all this consistently.
Exactly. A QMS provides the framework, the structure, for ensuring quality, and always looking for ways to improve. Even simple practical things, like storing samples in several small tubes aliquots instead of one big one, helps protect quality.
Why is that?
It minimizes freeze-thaw cycles. Every time you thaw and refreeze a sample, it can degrade slightly. Using small aliquots means you only thaw what you need for a specific experiment, leaving the rest untouched.
Smart. I also read about something called cross-audits between biobanks as a way to boost quality.
Yes, that's a really interesting collaborative approach. Having biobanks audit each other's processes is proving to have a really effective way to share expertise, improve practices, and build up skills in quality management.
And it probably builds trust, too.
Absolutely. A fantastic side effect. When institutions audit each other and see good practices, it fosters mutual trust, which makes future collaborations much smoother. It lifts the whole field.
That's clever. Okay, so we've got ethical frameworks, quality controls. Let's talk impact. Where are biobanks really moving the needle in research?
They're having a huge impact, especially in areas where bringing together resources is just critical.
Like studying rare diseases. I imagine that's tough because patient numbers are so small.
Exactly the challenge. For a rare disease, finding enough patients in one place to do meaningful research is incredibly difficult. Biobanks solve this by acting as central hubs. They gather samples and data from patients treated at many different hospitals or clinics, sometimes across countries.
So they overcome geography?
Precisely. They make multi-center collaboration possible in a way it just wasn't before.
Can you give some examples?
Sure. In rheumatology, for instance, you have biobanks like SLICC focusing on lupus, USTAR on systemic sclerosis, Myocyte on inflammatory muscle diseases, CARA for kids with rheumatic conditions. These are vital resources that no single hospital could build alone.
But even with these efforts, I gather things can still be a bit fragmented sometimes.
Yeah, that can still be an issue. The sources noted that even in fields with dedicated biobanks, like for those inflammatory myopathies, there's often still a need for better coordination between different biobanks and patient registries, making sure the data can talk to each other seamlessly. It's an ongoing challenge to connect all the dots effectively.
Okay. And what about personalized medicine? That seems like a perfect fit for biobanks.
Absolutely fundamental. Personalized medicine relies entirely on understanding individual differences. Biobanks provide the raw material for that.
Oh, so?
By linking that biological sample, maybe someone's full genome sequence with their detailed clinical record, how they responded to treatments, their lifestyle, researchers can hunt for biomarkers.
Biomarkers being...
Signals, basically.
Hmm.
Biological clues that might predict someone's risk of getting a disease, or how well they'll respond to a specific drug, or how their condition might progress. Biobanks are the treasure chest for finding those clues.
And with all that data, I guess artificial intelligence must come into play.
Oh, massively. You have these enormous data sets, genetics, clinical notes, outcomes, far too much for humans to sift through effectively. AI and machine learning algorithms are essential tools now for finding subtle patterns, complex correlations.
Things humans might miss.
Exactly. AI can help pinpoint potential biomarkers, predict disease risk, maybe even suggest the best treatment path for an individual patient. There was a company mentioned, Notable Labs, using biobank data specifically for that kind of predictive precision medicine.
So the biobank provides the fuel, the data, and samples, and AI is like the engine processing it.
That's a good analogy, yeah.
Yeah.
So how does that fuel actually get to the researchers who need it? How is stuff shared?
Right. Well, biobanks have processes for that. Researchers from universities, institutes, sometimes companies, even internationally, can submit a request for specific encoded data or samples.
Yeah.
Encoded, so still no names.
Still no names. The biobank reviews the request, checks the scientific merit, makes sure it fits within the consent rules, and all legal requirements are met. If approved, they transfer the requested materials.
And the researchers who get it, they can only use it for that specific project.
Strictly. The approval is for a defined purpose. They can't just use it for anything else. And typically, any leftover material has to be returned or properly destroyed afterwards.
Okay. And you mentioned commercial use earlier. Let's revisit that. Donors don't get paid if a drug comes out of it, but the biobank itself might charge companies for access.
That's generally how it works, yes.
Yeah.
Donors typically don't get direct financial benefit from commercial products developed using their samples, but biobanks often need to charge fees to users, including commercial companies, to cover their own costs.
Costs like,
Collecting, processing, storing samples long-term, managing the data, quality control, staff time. It's expensive infrastructure to run. So those fees help sustain the biobank so it can keep providing this resource to all researchers, academic and commercial, under those strict rules.
right, it keeps the whole system going. Okay, we've covered a lot, the science, the ethics, the standards, but one source brought up a really interesting angle, the human side, the people running these things.
Yes, it's easy to focus on the tech, the freezers, the data. But biobanks are run by people within complex organizations, and studies looking at biobank staff perspectives found something revealing,
Which was?
that while technical risks like, a freezer failing are often quite well understood and have clear
And
solutions.
people problems are harder.
Often, yes,
Mm-hmm.
risks related to, say, team dynamics, building trust with donors, navigating institutional politics, securing ongoing funding. These softer risks can be much more challenging to manage.
Yeah, I can see that. One study used a metaphor, didn't they? A biobank as a living organism.
That's right, a growing living organism in a changing environment. It really highlights that things like trust and sustainability aren't separate issues. They're woven through everything. They're essential for the biobank's health, just like the technical stuff. It's about the whole ecosystem.
So what are some of the operational day-to-day headaches they face in that context?
Well, beyond the science, practical things like limited infrastructure, complex governance structures, the fragmentation we talked about, making it hard to coordinate or even find specific resources across different biobanks.
Finding stuff sounds like a real issue.
It can be. If the directory is listing what samples are available, lack good detail metadata, researchers can struggle. Though tools are being developed, like the BBMRI ERIC negotiator in Europe, to try and make that searching and requesting process smoother.
And how are biobanks tackling these more human and system-level challenges?
There's definitely a growing focus on involving everyone, patients, staff, researchers, more directly in how biobanks are run, in governance.
Why is that important?
It builds trust, transparency, and makes sure decisions reflect different viewpoints. Plus, there's a push for more education, especially for younger researchers, to instill collaborative habits and understanding right from the start.
And I assume the constant challenge of keeping the lights on, funding.
Absolutely. Sustainability is a major, ongoing concern. Keeping these vital living organisms thriving needs constant attention to all aspects: technical, ethical, social, and financial.
So wrapping up, it's clear biobanking is really shifting how research happens, especially pushing things like rare disease understanding and, of course, personalized medicine forward.
Yeah, they become pretty much indispensable infrastructure for that. As medicine gets more tailored, more data-driven, the need for high-quality samples linked to deep data, exactly what biobanks provide, is only going to grow.
And the fact that the biobanking sector itself is growing, even attracting investment, really underlines its importance for the future, doesn't it?
Definitely. It's a sign that it's seen as a critical part of the biomedical landscape.
This has been really illuminating. We've covered so much ground, from the nitty-gritty of consent forms and data security to why sample quality is king and the very real human challenges of running these complex operations. Biobanks truly sit at this fascinating crossroads of science, ethics, logistics, and people.
Absolutely. And managing that balance, pushing science forward while being incredibly careful about the ethics and the practicalities, That's the constant tightrope walk for everyone involved in biobanking.
It really leaves you thinking, though, as these biobanks get bigger, link even more kinds of data, maybe health records, wearables data, environmental exposures, and as AI gets even smarter at connecting those dots, what new ethical questions pop up?
Hmm.
What does privacy even mean when data can be combined in ways we can't foresee? Who really owns the insights or the value generated from these massive collective resources? And maybe the biggest one, what does informed consent truly look like for research that might happen decades from now using techniques we haven't even dreamed up yet?
Yeah, those are the big questions looming on the horizon.
Definitely something to keep mulling over as this field dives even deeper into understanding human health.